going to go live and do like an online addiction support group. My name is Ashley Bloxham and I am a licensed therapist. I am an addictions counsellor. I have overcame addiction and I have been had the experience of somebody who has a loved one who has addiction. So and I've studied addiction. I've got a master's in it and I was doing my PhD for 2 years in it. So I have a full 360 degree view of addiction and I am here to help. So if anyone wants to join, I'll be giving some tips and tricks and just having a little chat on, well, addiction. So let's get started, class in session. So today, the topic that I want to talk about is addiction as a symptom. I think that one of the things that we do when we have an addiction or somebody else has got an addiction or we're in recovery is we see addiction as the issue that needs resolving. And I would argue that it is not. And I've got very good means to argue this with all the research that I've read and also participated in. So addiction actually is a symptom. So if you think of it like, I get eczema and cold sores. In fact, I've got a cold sore now. We'll go with cold sores. So I've got a cold sore and I don't always have cold sores. I don't permanently walk around with facial herpes. However, when I'm stressed and I'm feeling run down, the cold sore comes out or the eczema comes out. And instead of thinking, okay, I've got to treat the cold sore, yes, I do. But there's not that much I can do about it. I can put some cream on, but let's be real. It might make it a little bit less, but I'm going to be rocking a cold sore. So instead of thinking about the cold sore, what I actually do is I think about, okay, what's going on? Why have I got the cold sore? Because I must be run down. And I use it as an opportunity to think of it as a symptom of something bigger going on underneath, which is usually stress. It might be that my immune system's weak. Again, why is my immune system weak? Because I'm stressed. Okay, why am I stressed? And I just dig my way back. So it might be I'm stressed because I've got relationship issues. Okay, why do I have relationship issues? And that's because usually there's some little nugget in childhood which meant that I struggle in relationships. So I use the cold sore as an opportunity to trace back why I'm feeling the way I am. Now that is what I see addiction as, is a symptom. So instead of trying to manage the addiction, what I find to be really helpful is to use it as an opportunity to realise, okay, why am I addicted? So even now, as somebody who's been nearly 4 years sober, I say sober, I had an addiction to ket. So as for somebody who hasn't used that in nearly 4 years, sometimes I'll have a craving. Hi, by the way, I can see people have joined. Feel free to comment and I will reply. I'm just chatting about addiction. So I think to myself, after nearly 4 years, sometimes I have a thought of, oh, I want to go back into my addiction. I don't know what I can say online. I want to use K, I'm going to call it. And I don't sit there and think, right, let's go ring so-and-so and get some dropped off. In fact, I don't even know where I could get it from. But instead, I see it as a symptom and I think, okay, why am I all of a sudden thinking that I want to throw my life down the drain for this thing that I'm now nearly 4 years clean from? And often what it is highlighting to is there's some kind of psychological wound being triggered. Perhaps I'm struggling in life, perhaps I'm stressed. So now that I'm well into my recovery, I'm able to see it as a symptom that emerges its head when I'm feeling out of balance. And I get to go and work on that. So if you're somebody who is knee deep in addiction, or perhaps you're coming out of it, but you're still feeling the trenches of addiction, so you're in that recovery stage, instead of thinking about the addiction as being the problem, you can then start to think, okay, what is it the solution for? Why am I feeling like, why is engaging in this behavior, which is so detrimental, which I'm really despising myself for doing it. Why am I engaging in this behavior? What is it the symptom of? And it can be a really great place to start, just thinking, what is this a symptom of? And Gabor Mate talks about this, and he says, don't ask somebody why the addiction, ask what's the pain. So, hi, Michelle. No, I'm not a doctor, although I was doing my doctorate in psychology and addiction for women. But I ended up stopping because I'm a single parent. So, and my life was just a bit too much. And I was like, why am I doing this? But I am a counsellor. I'm talking about addiction. And I'm talking about addiction being the symptom of not rather than the problem. And what a good starting point for addiction can be about thinking, what is it a symptom of, as opposed to seeing it as the problem and trying to treat the problem. But yeah, well, thanks for tuning in, Michelle. I don't know if this has came up on your feed because you do drug addiction. Yeah, so I'm just talking about addiction in general, to be honest with you. I think this is another misconception. And again, when we're having this idea that the addiction's the problem, we think, oh, it's like just drug addiction, but actually there's so many different addictions out there. A lot of different addictions, and they're all the same. It's all the same manifestation, just in a different way. And actually, I would argue, even from my training, it might be addiction to sugar, eating sugar. It could be addiction to anything, social media. It could be to smoking. Like, addictions really is just something, a behavior that we're doing to help us cope with something going on underneath, whether that's psychological or maybe we're going through a physical stress. So yeah, so I don't know if you have any questions though, Michelle, because I know that you've said, is this about addiction? I assumed it would put us into people who are interested in addiction, but I am a therapist, so if there's anything, like I say, addiction is a symptom. If there's anything you want support with, please do let us know. So yeah, I think that often we think, oh, I've got to solve the problem, but actually it's not a problem, it's a solution. And as soon as we recognize it's a solution to an underlying problem, then we can start to change the actual root cause of the addiction. And that's a much better, more sustainable way of treating addiction, I would argue. So for me, and this isn't a lot of things, so like when I stopped with my drug addiction, I actually then moved on to just eating like sugary snacks. I was getting up at 3 a.m. So again, I didn't really heal the problem. I just stopped the undesirable addiction and then switched on to something else, and social media and all these other things. So it's actually really helpful to look at what's the actual root cause of it and deal with that. And that can be many things, but a way to do that, so say we've got this, if we see the addiction as the solution, and it's a solution to the problem, so the way we can trace that back is to what's going on in my life, my immediate life. So that might look like, am I happy in my environment? By environment, I might mean, am I happy with the people who are my friends, with my job that I'm doing? Am I happy with myself? And we can look at that. And then we can ask ourselves, okay, maybe it's like I'm in an unhealthy relationship with a partner. So then we can say, okay, this person, the wrong people, upbringing, yeah. So that's what I was going to get to. So it might be, say you've got I'm in an unhealthy relationship with a partner, and then you can trace that back again and say, well, why am I in an unhealthy, toxic relationship? And then you can trace that back, like Michelle said, to upbringing. Maybe I wasn't modelled a healthy relationship when I was growing up. Maybe I didn't feel loved in the right way. Certain psychological needs weren't met. So you can start to trace it back. So then when we come back from, so we've got the solution, which is the addiction. We've traced it right the way back to what's happening in the present moment and why is that happening, which is usually, I'd say 9 out of 10 times childhood. Then we're kind of stuck with, okay, this is why I'm behaving this way, like Michelle said, upbringing. Now what? So then what we can do is reparent ourselves, and we can say, okay, can't change the past, like we just can't, unfortunately, but what we can do is we can stop and we can change today and the future, and that's going to look like little baby steps. So there's this thing in counselling, a kind of counselling theory called solution focused therapy, and it has this technique that I would do with clients, which is called the miracle question. And what you can do is you can say, if I woke up to waved a magic wand and I woke up tomorrow and things were different, what would that look like? And it gives you a roadmap for how to move differently. So going back to the childhood. So we found out we've got the addiction. That is because we're knee deep in addiction because we're deeply unhappy in a toxic relationship. And the reason why I'm in this toxic relationship is because as a child, I wasn't modelled what healthy love looks like. So if we use the miracle question on that, what we might do is say, okay, if I was my parent when I was a child, so I've waved a magic wand and I'm now the parent and I'm meeting all my child's needs, aka little me, little Ashley, what would that look like? What would be different? And that might be, well, I would help her out. I would give her permission to have emotions. I would tell her that I love her every day. I would make sure she feels loved. I would support her, whatever it is. So now we've got this idea of what this different life for that younger version me would have looked like. So then what we can do is use something called scaling, which is another solution-focused technique, which says rate between 0 and 10 where you are on a scale. So this life that you've just described in this miracle question, think about in a scale of 1 to 10, how close am I to living this life? So, well, currently in this scenario, I'm an addict, in a toxic relationship. So I'd say I'm about a 2. So then you ask yourself, right, what one thing can I do today to get me from a 2 to a 3? So if we're going back to the miracle question, how I would parent myself is making sure that I feel loved. So to get me from a 2 to 3, what I might do is think about, okay, what can I do to show me that I love me? Do you get what I mean? So yeah. So let's go through. So is it going around with the wrong people upbringing? Why, yes, I agree. I'm in both. So when you say you're in both, what 2 things are you in both of? Do you mean, can you clear that up a little bit for us, what both is? But yeah, so this can be just a great thing to do with anything though. So scaling is really good, and it's actually great for addiction, because one of the things with addiction is we're using our emotional part of our brain, and if we can engage the logical part of our brain, we can actually snap ourselves out of it. So being able to say, okay, what one small thing can I do to get me from a 2 to a 3, you're actually using a different part of your brain, which is going to be really helpful for addiction, because the more we do it, the more we're going to lead with that side of our brain, which is why, incidentally, there's a lot of research which shows that meditation's helpful. Right, so let's see what Michelle's saying. I'm in both weed and wrong relationships. Yeah, so that's so common. And so if obviously I don't know the full situation, and this isn't a replacement for therapy, but if we use that, look at that. So a great thing start in place if you're wanting to stop weed. And let's be real as well, addiction is only something when you feel like it's a problem. So I did this training where it really debunked this myth around addiction. We often label people as having an addiction, and actually it's up to that person to decide if they've got one. So somebody might be using that alcohol every day, drink alcohol every day and they're fine. It's not problematic. They enjoy it. That's fine. Like, let them crack on. But if somebody feels like it's a problem, then it becomes an addiction. So I'm assuming when you say weed, it's an addiction. But I get addicted to everything due to PTSD and BPD. Yeah, so I've got CPTSD, PTSD from some kind of abuse I had in later life, and I've got bipolar and ADHD. I'm actually just riddled, let's be real. We're all mad here. But yeah, so that mystery dude is a mind-altering substance. You're addicted to dopamine, mate. That's what I learned from my psychiatrist. But yeah, so... Right, so I'll tell you what I'm going to do, because Michelle's talking about weed and wrong relationships. I'm going to deal with Michelle, but if you stick about mystery dude, I'll try and help you with your thing, how it can apply to you. So we've got the weed is the symptom, because remember we said addiction is a symptom. So what's probably happening is one of the reasons why we're struggling to break free of addiction is if our environment is triggering the life out of us. It's very hard to get sober if the thing that's if we think of it like self-medicating, if there's still things in our life that we're having to self-medicate, it's going to be quite difficult to step away from it, because if you think of addiction being like your security blanket, it's something that keeps you safe, it's a coping mechanism. If we strip that away, but we're in a very unhealthy relationship, we're really going to be struggling to keep sustain that recovery. So what you find often happens, and what certainly happened with me, was I'm in an environment which is triggering the life out of us. I'm getting sober, and then I'm thinking, oh my God, this is horrible being sober, because I'm now having to deal with this horrible life. So then I'm falling back into it, and I could never sustainably get away from it. And I knew all the stuff, I've been studying all this childhood addiction, everything for 17 years. So I was like, why is this not working? And what it was is, well, actually, I'm self-medicating this rubbish situation. So when Michelle is saying wrong relationships, so say you've got friends who put you down, say that's the relationships that Michelle's talking about. Obviously, I don't know the ins and outs. But if you're self-medicating because you feel like rubbish, you don't feel good from childhood, you've had a rubbish upbringing, I don't feel enough, and then I've got friendships around us who are reflecting back to us that I'm not enough, I'm not good, then it's understandable that I'm still going to be wanting to lean into that addictive behaviour. So what I can do, so if we go back to that miracle question, what would my life look like if I thought I was enough, if I loved myself? Well, in friendships, I would have boundaries, my friends would treat as well. They would be helpful, my friends would be lovely. So then an action, one little step that we could do is start to put in boundaries and say, actually, when you do this, I feel a certain way. So for instance, if a friend's putting you down, this is an example, and they're saying things to you which are hurting your self-esteem, then I might put in a boundary and say, sometimes when you're saying things, I know you might not mean it in this way, but I feel a bit upset. So if you, in the future, I'm just going to point this out to you so that you know not to do it. So you put in a boundary. Now, if it's a good friend, they'll be like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. I didn't realise that was offensive. And they'll change. If it's not a good friend, then we go back to the drawing board and say, what would I do in this instance, if I love myself? Well, I've already told them how I'm feeling. I've already put in a boundary. They don't care. So I would remove myself. And one step further, I would surround myself with people who big us up and make me feel good about myself, because I love myself. So why would I be in a position where I've got these horrible people making me feel rubbish? Because that's not aligned with me. So you can also go further and think, why do I have people in my life who make us feel rubbish? Well, that's because when I grew up, my parents used to put us down. They used to say I wasn't good at this and I wasn't good at that. So again, we can start to heal that inner child, and that might look like sitting with a therapist. It might be using AI. There's an AI therapy app called EarKick. That's great. I've done some work with them. But you know, you can go back and think, forget the addiction, forget the weed. That's helping me in the here and now. That's helping me deal with whatever's going on underneath. So I need to heal that. And then what you'll find is the more you love yourself, the more you'll think, well, if I loved myself, I wouldn't be doing this, because this isn't an enjoyable thing. I hate myself when I smoke weed, so I'm going to not smoke weed. And then you go through the process of getting sober. Right, so I'm going to go back to read the comments. Smoked for 20 years. Yeah, stopped. Yeah, that is brilliant. Right, I get addicted to everything due to PTSD and BPD. Yeah, I have ADHD, autism. You're like me, mystery dude. God, I've got everything. I'm riddled. Autism, ADHD, bipolar, dyslexia. I'm just new or spicy. Let's be real. I don't feel like I've got all these things for, you know. Try telling me this psychiatric unit when I was sectioned a few years back. But yeah, live in the UK, which is perfect. Yeah, so weed is addictive. I only quit because of the chest pains. Yeah, so I'm interested, mystery dude, because you've said that where was it? I get addicted to everything. Is that something you're struggling with now, or are you just like riding it sober? Because one of the things I found with me is that was part of where my addiction was. When we're talking about addiction being a symptom, is I found out that actually part of it was self-medicating. So the more I've learned how to manage my disorders, the more I've been able to it's been a lot easier, my recovery. However, and this is like where it gets fun, now as a mental health worker, a lot of the research says that the majority of these disorders are actually a symptom as well. So we've got the addiction is medicating these cluster of symptoms, which stem, again, back to childhood, mainly. I think the only one in that which is arguably not is autism. But there's some research studies which say that might be bloody Donald Trump saying it's down to the mums taking ibuprofen, but I don't think I'd listen to Donald Trump. He's not a reliable source, for God's sake. Right, so yeah, so I'm interested if you want to share. Obviously you don't have to, mystery dude, like, are you dealing with addiction at the moment? Right, let's see. Yes, I was in care. Yeah, oh no, Michelle, when you're saying I was in care, it could be that. It absolutely will be a huge factor. I can guarantee that. 100%. There's a huge study. It's the largest study they did with addiction, and it was focusing on heroin and crack. I think it might have been heroin use. It might have been heroin and crack cocaine use, but it's representative of addiction. And it was so interesting. So it was like, I think it was like 20,000 plus participants. And what they found was that 2/3 of them had experienced childhood, and I don't want to say this on here because it's live, but something that absolutely should never happen in childhood, if you're picking up what I'm putting down. And then the rest was abuse. So the other third had experienced abuse. So it was like 90% of these participants out of 20,000 had experienced some kind of childhood trauma. So like, and ACEs, so there's something like called ACEs, where it's like, what does it stand for? It's escaped us. That will come back to us because I know this inside out. But there's something called ACEs, and these are what they, in psychology, would predetermine your susceptibility to addiction, depression, different things like that. And again, the higher these ACEs are, your score on this ACE test, the more susceptible you are to addiction. So like, if you haven't already, I'm just seeing there, Michelle said mum was an alcoholic. If you haven't already explored this, like in a safe space, aka with a therapist or, just a safe space, I absolutely would look into that. Because if you can heal that, you'll find the addiction is just a symptom. So it'll be much easier to manage. Right, I'm going to go through and see what other people said. So bear with us because I know there's a lot of comments. Cannabis is medically prescribed for chronic pain. What's your thoughts on this? Like I said, so I did training with blue light. It's one of the many addiction training I did. And addiction's only a problem if it's only an addiction if you see it as a problem. So if somebody's using it and it works, fair enough. But I personally, my personal view, and this is not, you know, a lot of the stuff I try to say is grounded in research. This is just my opinion, like an educated guess. I think anything that we're getting prescribed is just masking. Like, if we have an addiction to something else and it helps with it, like, it's a symptom. You know, so, like, it's like when you have, oh, let's have an antidepressant. Now, there's nothing wrong with antidepressants, but we're basically putting money into the pharmaceutical industry to get a tablet to stop us from feeling depressed. Now, depression's a symptom. Like, all of these are symptoms. Eating disorders, addiction, depression, they're all the same thing. They're just manifesting in different ways. So, yeah, we can take a tablet. Yeah, we can have cannabis. But actually, it's much better to try and deal with the root cause. Now, the problem with things like chronic back pain is sometimes we get you know, we can't just manage these things holistically. So like depression, a good thing is, like, for instance, bipolar. I know bipolar is a symptom of my childhood. That's unquestioned, like, without doubt. There's so much evidence which suggests that. But if I had to take quetiapine, like some medications, so that I'm not getting sectioned, because I've got a responsibility as a mum and I'm not really, it's not practical getting beamed up by aliens at night. True story. You know, I'm not going to sit here and not take my medication. So my belief is that often chronic back pain is from something else, is symptomatic. And sometimes, you know, we need to accept that we need extra support. So that's my thoughts on that. But you can still link chronic back pain back to something else. Maybe it's to do with, like, posture, or I'm not a medical person. I don't want to offend anyone, but there might be, like, I've got a friend who has chronic back pain. They're really tall, you know, fair enough. Like, it's not my place to sit here, but yeah, I do think we don't always have to lean on pharmaceuticals, and cannabis doesn't always have to be the only route. There might be something else we can do as well. Right, we take drugs to escape from reality, but ultimately we quit and face our problems head on. We forgive, but we never forget the pain that will haunt us till the end. Yeah, that's so true. And I think it's about learning how to manage that pain, so that we're not reacting in a way, or we're not having to medicate. Often what I feel like the thing with addiction is we have trauma, so childhood trauma, or maybe a big trauma in life. Maybe we lose a spouse or something. Veterans often struggle with addiction, so maybe we have, you know, some complex grief or whatever. So we have this trauma up here, and then what we have on the other side is our resilience. So how resilient we are. And if there's a mismatch between resilience and trauma, we often fill the gap with something different, some kind of relief, like Mystery Duda said, from pain. So that can play out in different ways. Maybe the trauma is so great that we've not learned the resilience as a human being to be able to deal with that trauma. So that's when addiction might come into play, or self-sabotage and unhealthy behaviours. You know, like I said, eating disorders, maybe we sabotage relationships, maybe we don't let people close to us, whatever the unhealthy behaviour is. Or maybe there's a trauma, but we weren't taught the right resilience in childhood to deal with the trauma. So that might look like we didn't have the right love and support. Our psychological needs weren't met. And let's be real, as a generation, you know, as a full generation, our psychological needs weren't met. you know, there's a reason why we're here generational cycle breakers, because like, I'm a millennial, like, it was normal to get told off. It was normal to say, don't cry. It was normal to say, be good, be behaved, you're not allowed emotions, even more so for men, which is why obviously there's a lot more psychological impact with men. Addiction is much higher in men, as is a lot of other mental health issues. So, you know, as a generation, we weren't taught how to get that resilience. So it can be a process. I know you said, Mystery Dude said, we can forgive, but we can never forget that pain. We can't forget the pain, but what we can try and do is learn how to manage that pain, which bridges the gap, and we can learn how to build our resilience. And hopefully we can close that gap. Yeah, and I think that's where, again, seeing the addiction as a symptom can be so helpful, because we can say, well, actually, I haven't got the right resilience because as a generation we weren't taught the right resilience, and I had these childhood experiences, and actually the trauma and the pain was really severe. So it's not my fault, but I do have a bit of responsibility, a bit of ability, I suppose more so than responsibility, to close that gap so that I don't need to rely on the addiction, the thing that's helping. Hope that was helpful. No friends and family, it's just me. Mystery Dude. We so need friends, but like, do you find that talking on things like this is helpful? Because I think we need connection. I said we need friends, but actually we need connection. Is there ways that you connect with people? Because that can be so helpful. Right, what I'm gonna do, because there's a few comments, I'm just gonna keep going through. Medication is pointless. Therapy is also useless. Makes you feeling worse off. What you need is a good distraction and good people around you. Sadly, I have myself only, but I'm still here trying. Do you know what a great thing for you to do, Mystery Dude, is? There is a lot of research out there around addiction and also mental health, which says being of service is really great. So yeah, I absolutely agree with what you said. Like, you've made some tremendous points that you keep saying. I fully agree. And as a therapist, I think of therapy alone it's not the be all and end all. It has its place, it's helpful. But we need connection. But being of service is a great way. So like volunteering, I don't know if you do anything like that, but that is a great way to have connection, to create connection, because it's not so much needing the friends, it's needing that human interaction. We are social creatures. We're tribal animals, and I always look back to our ancestors. We need to feel like we have a purpose. Like, if you look at tribes, one person makes the arrowheads, one person is the shaman, one person's the storyteller. So finding your purpose in life and gaining connection through that, because often a huge driving force for addiction is loneliness. And I tell you what, I don't know about everybody listening, but for me, it wasn't just the loneliness. Like, if I wasn't lonely entering addiction, I certainly felt lonely when I came out of it. I felt like I lost everybody, and the only people who I had around us were people who I didn't really align with, because, you know, we're all just sitting there thinking about how to get the next fix. It wasn't a good connection. Yeah, society is killing us, James. 100% agree. It really is. And I think, you know, it's like swimming against the tide sometimes, and I've found that quite often. And actually, I found that to be really unhelpful as well, the expectation of the knowing that society is really against us, and feeling trapped in it, and then feeling like I'm failing. So I think it's a really hard line to toe, managing mental health and addiction and recovery, whilst also seeing that actually this is a crock of shite. It really is. I used to take weed, MDMA, coke, speed, ket, acid, tabs. Yeah, all of the above. That was me. OJ, weed didn't cause the chest pain. That's anxiety. Yeah, I mean, it could be anxiety from taking, I would agree with that. It could be anxiety of being a weed addict. Because, like, I don't know about anybody who's on here who's had an addiction, but that's anxiety inducing. Like, oh my God, I've never been so bloody scared in my life. Like, literally thinking, like, am I gonna ever be able to stop? Like, that's quite anxiety inducing. So yeah, I agree with OJ, but also chest pain, as in, like, it does, like, clog your arteries. There's a lot of physical effects. So, like, I think it's all valid. It really is. And I think that's the thing, like, addiction is not it's not black and white. And I think we really need to explore the grey to have successful recovery. I'm just addicted to sugar and gambling. Yeah, I feel you. Gambling's I hate gambling. I don't know who was it who said that society was it, yeah, James Hill, society is killing us. Gambling boils my way. It's an absolute liberty that it's even allowed. But yeah. And I think though the thing is, Mystery Dude, as well, being 2 years and 10 months sober, I think so. I have to admit that I still vape. And I've only just stopped drinking in the last few months. I'd done quite a long stint of not drinking, but I'd stopped again recently in the last few weeks. Sorry, I just said months. I meant weeks. And something that I've had to do is accept, we're talking about ADHD and all these mental health disorders and bipolar. I've had to accept, I am at a deficit with dopamine, and it's about having healthy addictions, and the vape's next on my list to go. But I've been trying to replace it with healthier things, gym, jiu-jitsu, make sure that I've got solid relationships in my life, make sure that I'm solid with myself, I love myself. I'm just going to plug my phone in. But yeah, well done though. Like, I think that's amazing that you've got down to sugar and gambling. Honestly, my heart is starting to fail. Doctors say I'm healthy, but man, I don't feel it. Palpitates all the time. Bad headaches. That sounds like, and I'm not here to diagnose, but do you think, this is a question for you, do you think it could be around being in a constant state of fight or flight, anxiety? Because I struggle with that ADHD. Essentially, ADHD is grown up in a heightened state of hypervigilance, and then your brain develops in a state of fight or flight. Gabor Mate talks about that in Scattered Minds. James Hill, that's my opinion, although I'm taking it for fibromyalgia. Yeah, I know someone with fibromyalgia, and it's really hard. It's also these are all symptoms, but like sometimes, there's a lot of evidence out there which is saying that autoimmune diseases and all these different diseases are all stemming from, all symptoms of different things, albeit whether that's, of society, let's be real, let's keep it broad. And you wouldn't sit there and say, don't treat an autoimmune disease. Do you know what I mean? You wouldn't say, don't treat it. I'm not saying like let's not treat things, but like also be compassionate to yourself that, okay, sometimes we are in a position where, okay, I do have fibromyalgia. It is a symptom. I am going to use cannabis for that, if that's what you're using it for. And that's fine. In that situation, I would say to yourself, ask yourself, are you hanging on to shame around it then? Look at the intention. Again, say it as a symptom. Maybe it's just self-medication, and maybe that's what you need to self-medicate. I'm never ever going to sit here and judge someone for using a substance. At the end of the day, it's no different to being prescribed something. I was put on quetiapine for bipolar, and I actually went cold turkey. It was like the